Hello, everyone. Stephen again, and I'm very pleased to be able to spend a little bit more time with you around the fifth module of the CPA Mentor Center Resources webinar series on the essentials of coaching. Module 5 is the second of the sort of two-part skills focus, coaching applications across contexts. This is tools and skills part 2. So we'll be continuing the discussion of specific skills for effective coaching. And again, you will continue to see, and I'll do my very best to draw connections back to some of the earlier modules. Again, lots of overlap, both with the other types of concepts that we've talked about vis-a-vis coaching, as well as the ways in which we communicate higher order skills and the value of them to our coachees. So there's going to be, again, sort of an overlap of both the skills for us as effective coaches, as well as, again, some ideas that we can use to communicate the value of these skills, not just for ourselves and our coaching, but for the careers and professional development of the coachees that we're working with. So, what are we going to look at today? What is today's agenda for this fifth module in the series of Essentials of Coaching? So today we're going to look at 4 areas. We're going to look at, number 1, rapport and relationship development. Again, one of the things we talked about in Module 3 was about the sources of power, and one of the ones we talked about was this idea called referent power, or the relationships that we have with people, noting that this is an important source of power and influence for our coachees to learn. And today we're going to look at that, but as well as the ways in which rapport development can impact our effectiveness as a coach, and some of the ways in which we can actually enhance our ability to develop relationships and rapport with people. Now, I want to start by saying, before we even get into this stuff today, that, it's very difficult even for someone to listen to advice on how to build a relationship. Unlike many skills in organizations and many applications we have of concepts that we utilize in an organization, probably some of the ones that produce the greatest amount of reluctance for learning is relationship development tools. And that's a really important one to think about because, if you don't know how to write a budget in an organization and you need help writing a budget, there's no shyness, there's no wounding of my ego to go and ask the guy or gal who puts together a budget to say, can you teach me how? Same if you're, in a role where you have to do some marketing, but you don't know much about marketing plans. You might go to the person who does and get them to teach you how to. And I think there's this very little kind of shyness or reluctance to go and ask for people advice on these things when you don't know about them. But that's not true in the area of relationship development. In other words, people very infrequently at work will go to somebody else and say, hi, I need to learn how to have a better relationship with the people that I work with. We don't ask for advice on this topic. Why? Because to say I don't know how to have rapport and relationships with people is to sort of strike at the core of what it means to be a human being. So we don't want to, in looking to learn about this more, we're in essence admitting that we don't know how. People don't want to admit that they know how. It's one of the, relationship development and generally psychology, generally my field, is the only field in the world where almost everyone's an expert having never studied it. Why am I bringing this up? Because it's important to learn about these things. In order to really learn about some of the tools we're going to talk about today, we have to do what I call take a couple of steps back. In other words, if we're resistant around the ideas of being better at relationship and rapport, then we will not be able to learn these tools. We will rebel against them, we'll ignore them, we won't use them. So I think it's hugely important to really take a couple steps back and be open to learning about some improvement in our relationship and rapport development tools. That's one of the major focuses in this module. So that's why I bring it up. Secondly, we're going to talk about goals and norms. Similar ideas. We're going to use some of the concepts we've talked about throughout this program all the way back to one of the earlier modules where we talked about the value of words and how words matter. We watched a wonderful video that probably brought tears to a couple people's eyes around the notion that words matter. In the last and most recent module, we talked a fair bit about the ambiguity of communication and words and about how to use that to set objectives for communication, interpersonal or otherwise. And today we're going to be looking at how that same concept helps us to really manage the expectations we have of each other in a coaching relationship. Very important for coaches. Very important in every relationship. But in our personal relationships, we might be afforded the opportunity of time to develop norms and rules for how we work together and how we do things together. In our intimate relationships, maybe even in our organizational rules, we might have the time, the benefit of time and contact to be able to allow time to help us develop rapport and relationships. In this coaching context, you will not have that level of time. You're going to have to, on purpose, incorporate some real interventions and tools and practices to develop rapport and relationship with your coachees. And you're going to be able to need that time to also develop some norms and manage the expectations you have of each other. Thirdly, we're going to talk about another skill that is sort of hard for people to learn because, again, we sort of sometimes think we have these skills already, and that is about social and emotional development. Social and emotional skills. And we're going to talk about basically two kinds of social and emotional skills. We're going to talk about social awareness and emotional management, and we're going to talk about self-awareness and emotional management, all borrowed from some of the wonderful work that's been done on emotional intelligence, EQ and EI. Then we're going to get into, again, another application. We're going to talk a little bit about the logistics, timing, and a model for the coaching process and some suggestions for you. We started talking about this in the last module when we made some suggestions around the mediums to use. We talked about how the ideal medium is face-to-face. We talked about the reality that it's not always possible, and some ideal makeups for how we divide up face-to-face versus electronic communication in the context of coaching. And we'll continue that by looking at things like logistics and timing and process. Ah, yes, rapport. It's a beautiful word. Not sure if people are aware of this, but of course it comes from the French. It's a French word. I'm not French, so I'm not going to try to say it in a French accent, but I will say that it sounds a lot nicer in the French accent. But here's one of the interesting things. If people are listening are in fact francophone and speak French as your native language, you'll probably be well aware that the word rapport does not have a perfect translation in English. It roughly means relationship, but it also means a connection, emotional connection, like a vibe, or we might call it in the vernacular, the slang, we might call it gel, to gel with somebody. And rapport is sort of a richer definition of relationship. Why is this so important? Why are relationships and coaching so important? Well, relationships make coaching easier and make some of the challenges associated with coaching easier. Now, you can't help but, and also, again, more effective. Now, why is this? So all you got to do is really look metaphorically, maybe at some other elements or contexts of our lives to start to really see how relationships make a difference. If you're fortunate enough, like a lot of people are, and I certainly am, to have some wonderful friends that I've grown up with, some buddies that I've been friends with for a long time, some BFFs. It's interesting the ways in which you are able to communicate with someone you know well and how that's different from someone that you don't know well. And you really see this when you look at your friends. So, for example, you have one of your close friends, a close girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, that you've been friends with for a long time, and you're kidding around with them. You can kid around with that friend, and you can poke fun at them, and they'll laugh, right? The better your rapport, the lighter the relationship is, the lighter the communication is, which can be really valuable when you're talking about heavy stuff. Secondly, when rapport is high, we can do some pretty interesting things. We can do 3 of the most important things for relationships. You know, when my son was about 6 years old, he came to me and asked me a question that I thought was quite profound. He said to me, "Dad, what do you need to be awesome?" And of course I said, "Son, what do you mean?" He said, "I want to be awesome at work. I want to be awesome at home. I want to be awesome at school. I want to be a great person." This is a true story. And he said, "Dad, what do you need to be awesome?" And of course I told him, "Son, oddly enough, I've spent some time thinking about the answer to this question because of the nature of the work that I do, and I can tell you what these things are. But by the way, son, they're a life's work. In other words, it's not something you can turn on like a switch. We have to work at this. Here's the 3 things: apology, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Can you say sorry? Can you forgive people when they've done something wrong? And can you make your goal focus, your objective, to reconcile and solve problems as opposed to advocate points of view? To address understanding and appreciation for different perspectives rather than agreement or being right. So that we talked about in the last module. I did a lot of thinking about this. Apology, forgiveness, and reconciliation. These are difficult things. Apology is very difficult. Saying sorry. I don't know about you, but there's a whole generation that I've encountered in this country that has never even said the word. I bet you there's people here that are listening right now that know folks who have never said sorry. I don't think I heard my dad say sorry till he was in his 60s. It's pretty interesting. But one of the if you are the person, one of these people who can say it and has used it and has received it, it is a magical word because it removes problems between people. And of course, the flip side, forgiveness. One of the things that's really interesting about these is you have to ask yourself, if forgiveness is difficult, because it is, people hold grudges, people stay angry at each other. Apology, also very difficult. In the face of conflict and problems and emotionally charged experiences and contexts, reconciliation, also very difficult. Rapport makes the difficult easier. Apology is easier with rapport. We give up less of ourselves to say sorry when we have a relationship, but when we don't have a relationship, saying sorry feels like you're chipping away at your soul. But when we have rapport, it's easier. Same thing with forgiveness. Same thing with reconciliation. It's very fascinating that these 3 hugely important components of being great, being good as a communicator, as a person, certainly an important part of being a coach, is the idea that we need to apologize, forgive, and reconcile, and that relationships with people are the things that make those outcomes easier. And actually, as you listen to me right now, perhaps this makes a lot of sense to you. It certainly does to me. So, rapport development can make coaching easier and can also make coaching more effective. Even all you have to do is even think about something like, hopefully people know what backpedaling is. Backpedaling, obviously it's sort of saying, that didn't come out right. I need to say that again. I got the wrong word. If you have rapport with somebody at work or even in a coaching context or in a management context, and you say to them, come, guns blazing into their office, complaining about something, and you realize in the moment, probably because you were part of this webinar, wait, I need to plan myself better. I need to think about what my objective is. And you might even say it in the moment, you know what, person who I'm freaking out at, I need to think this over. Can I start again? I didn't say this the right way. When you have rapport, the likelihood of that person saying, no problem, you go ahead and backpedal, take a minute, is higher than if you don't. Simple. So the question becomes, what creates rapport? What creates rapport? Well, I love the title of this slide. It says, personal choices and actions to enhance rapport. Because it's not just about actions, it's also about choices. It's not just about choice is a really important concept in being able, in our own development as a coach, as well as in the development of the people that we work with. Choice implies that people are flexible and that there are elements of the ways in which we act and behave that we can choose to, and that it's not just dependent upon who we truly are as a person, but well beyond that. So what are some of the personal choices and actions that we can engage in to enhance rapport in the context of being a coach, because that rapport is crucial to your effectiveness as a coach. The first one is one that people really don't love to hear, but it's liking. In other words, your coachees are more likely to take your advice if they like you than if they don't. You know, intuitively, I think we all know this, but it's one of these things that we don't even look at. You know, again, we go back to module 3. It's because we emphasize the rightness of actions, logic, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about liking. We're going to talk about confidence. Confidence is also one of the things that enhances rapport, but perhaps confidence isn't always what we think it is. Salience, pretty interesting idea. That is about what are you showing other people? Relates to some of the things we talked about in the last module around perception. Managing the perceptions that other people have of you is an important part of your rapport. Disclosure, sharing, openness. That's one of the primary things that creates rapport between people. There's really, when we look at it in that perspective, there's two that are, the most crucial: activity and disclosure. You think about it that, one of the things we do to get closer to people is to engage in projects, to go and play games, to go to movies, to go and eat, right? All these things produce connections and rapport between people. So does disclosure. Sharing secrets, crying, being upset, sharing problems, asking for advice, revealing something of ourselves. All you have to do is think about intimate relationships in all of our lives and jobs too. In intimate relationships, the more we reveal of ourselves, the more richer our relationship is. Same thing at work. The more we reveal of our initiatives and our ideas, the more likely they are to be implemented, the more likely we are to move ahead in our careers and do well and achieve our full potential. And lastly, care and concern for well-being of others. And we're going to talk about what that looks like as well. So let's start with liking. Liking is again one of those interesting things that we really do want to believe, and I hear this sentiment quite often. I have people, especially sort of some of the, for lack of a better term, older school management styles, that would say, you know what, fondness of each other, and human connections, pleasure and liking, no place at work, which of course is nonsense. Largely because the bulk of our waking lives we spend at work. And if the bulk of our waking lives that we spend at work ignores fondness for human beings, what kind of a life do we have? What kind of an organization do we work in? What kind of turnover are we going to have? What kind of commitment and engagement are we going to have? And as a coach, what kind of engagement are we going to have from our coachees if we don't have those things? We're going to be wasting our time. So, a big part of liking begins with trusting people. Part of your role as a coach is to share some of your experiences, which means you're going to have to disclose things to people. But if you don't trust the coachees that you're working with and you don't feel confident or comfortable sharing things with them, you're not going to have the kind of rapport that you want. You have to open up and make the choice to trust people. What does that mean? People like to believe, well, isn't trust something that somebody proves to me? Isn't it evidentiary, or borrow from some legal terms? Don't we have to have proof that someone can be trusted? I hear this all the time. I can delegate that to them if I can trust them, but I don't. So, of course, the solution is you should trust them. But the question is, where does trust come from? Is it a noun or is it a verb? Is it something that exists or is it something that you do? Well, it's sort of both, but really ultimately it's something that you do. What does trust mean? Trust means to have faith in the unknown, in the absence of any knowledge or information about that unknown. That's what trust means. So when we say I only trust them when I'm certain that I can trust them, well, that's not trust at all. That's what I call certainty. Trust means I'm going to make the choice to assume and find the best in other people. I'm going to make the choice to assume and find the best in a situation. I'm going to make the choice to trust people from the start. Start at 100, not at 0, at 100. That is fundamental to creating a fond relationship between people. If your coachee feels that you don't trust them, they're not going to trust you. And as soon as that happens, the relationship is over. And you will not be able to help each other in any way. Make the choice. You don't know the truth anyhow. You don't know the truth about what the truth is about why someone's doing something or what a situation is. So given that, let's make a positive assumption. If we're presented with the opportunity to make an assumption, let's make a choice to make it a positive one. Or you're going to make a different choice. Or you're going to make a choice not to trust. You're going to make a choice to assume the worst in people. That's a choice too. One of the other challenges with liking is, people tell me, Stephen, you want me to trust this person. You want me to create a relationship with this person. What if I don't give a darn? What if I don't genuinely like them? Aren't I being fake? Aren't I being phony? Is this what you're teaching me, to be a phony? Where does genuineness lie? People tell me I'm going to be nice to this person, create a liking relationship, but I'm faking it. And of course my advice is, then don't fake it anymore. Who determines whether or not you're genuine? Some entity that's separate from you? Your boss? The universe? God? How about you? You determine if it's genuine. As soon as you, that's one of the wonderful things about choices. As soon as you decide it's genuine, it is. So make the choice. It reminds me of an old story. And again, I love these old stories. Guy goes to his doctor. By the way, I know that sounds like a joke, but it's not actually funny at all. There's no punchline. But guy goes to his doctor, says, "Doctor, I don't love my wife anymore." Doctor says, "Oh my goodness, that sounds like a terrible turn of events. What on earth are you going to do?" He says, "I don't know. I don't feel it anymore. I don't have love for my wife anymore." So, doctor says, "Go away and think about it for 2 weeks. Come back and talk to me again." So he goes away, comes back. Doctor comes back in the office. Doctor says, "So, how's it going?" He says, "Not great. I still don't love my wife anymore." The doctor says, "I have the solution for you." On bated breath, the patient says, "What? What's the solution?" The doctor says, "Love her." Your genuineness, what things are really, what the truth is your choice. Make the choice to assume the best of people. Let's talk a little bit about confidence. Confidence happens to be one of the most powerful predictors of relationships and buy-in and influence and persuasion, according to psychological studies and research. Confidence is also one of the primary sources of all sorts of attractiveness, whether you're talking about marriage and couples and dating and intimate relationships, all the way to careers, getting jobs, influence and persuasion, and buy-in and sales. Confidence is the top of the list. But here's the thing. I don't think we always understand what confidence really is. Maybe it's not what you think. Confidence is not about knowing it all. Confidence is not about being the devil's advocate and challenging and pushing people all the time. That is not confidence. Those things might be valuable in some contexts, but that is not confidence. Confidence is more about humility. Why? Because confidence is about doing the things that are difficult to do. And you know what? Being humble is much more difficult than knowing it all. Especially when you're dealing with professionals, which you will be in your coaching endeavors with these students. Humility produces confidence. Showing that you have things to learn from others, that you don't have all the answers, and that you want to listen. This brings about perception of confidence. After all, what could be more confident than being able to admit that you don't have all the answers? Confidence also is communicated by our willingness to learn from others. As a coach, you're going to be teaching others too, but you want to show that you're learning from them too. These coachees have something to offer as well, and their ability to take your advice and listen, and hence your effectiveness as a coach is enhanced also by your willingness to hear them and their perspectives. And your level of transparency and openness also produces confidence, especially when that transparency and openness speaks to uncertainty and humility, in addition to answers and solutions. It's a pretty cool idea, pretty interesting. Same with this one. Really, I love the word salience. This is very much from my field. It's a psychological word. And like many things in psychology, we give them these funky, kind of complicated words, when really they're pretty simple ideas. Salience is about what stands out. What sticks out that people notice? Salience as a tool, though, is really about being able to control what other people see in you via your behavior. You know, I hear from people all the time. I do a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of work around training managers and coaches how to be coaches. And people say, they misunderstand me. There are things about me that are wonderful, but they're only seeing these other things. And of course, the solution is then show them the things you want them to see. If there are things you want people to notice, show them those things. Remember, we spoke about this in the previous module, perception equals fact. The job of managing the perceptions that other people have of you is up to you. What are you showing them? If you want to show kindness, if you want them to see you as kind, you got to show kindness. Your relationship is dependent upon what you show other people, not the truth about who you are, because what the heck is that? Every one of us that's listening right now is capable of good things and capable of bad things. They're capable of joy and unhappiness. They're capable of pleasantness and nastiness. So what are you going to show to maintain and enhance the relationship you have with your coachee? You know, intentions don't always matter to other people. It's actions that matter. And that's a big part of salience. What are you showing other people? Of course, another old expression, which I love this one. The road to hell was paved with good intentions. And of course, a big part of being able to engage and use this tool to show people what you want to see is self-control. Being able to be in charge of how you behave. Disclosure, another one that I mentioned earlier. Disclosure is about mutual sharing. It's about transparency and being open with other people. You know what, practically speaking, you know what's a really great one for coaches that I have found really works at the front end? Because oftentimes you won't always find that your coachee is perhaps shy or reluctant to develop a relationship with you, but you know, by the nature of the fact that you as a coach are more experienced than them and that your role is to help and guide them, it's very common that there's a power differential and a reluctance from the coachee to be as open as perhaps you might be willing to be. That's normal. But how do you open them up? How do you begin the process really of developing this rapport? Disclosure is a really great way to do it. What I usually suggest to people is to start with your career path and your story. To begin and open up that first interaction with that coach by saying, you know what, let me tell you about how I got where I am. And include in that career path and story other elements of your life, your personal life, relationships, where you grew up, friendships, partnerships, children, family. These things are all part of your story, and that's the kind of disclosure that makes for a better relationship with your coachee. The more vulnerable you feel in expressing yourself, the richer the rapport. And it's not uncommon in almost every relationship, work and personal. And then, once we give our story, get them to tell you theirs, which is essentially a walk through a resume as well as the other elements of their personal life. It's a really great way to break the ice. It's a real great turn-taking thing for coaching and a really great way to start to begin down the road of developing a really healthy and beneficial relationship with your coachee. Care and concern. Care and concern for well-being. This is one of the more profound elements of developing a relationship. And this, of course, is amenable not just to coaching, but to all sorts of work and personal relationships. You know, one of the most interesting things about learning about people is that one of the things that develops rapport with people has to do with the extent to which other people see you as giving a darn about them, as caring about them. You know, my first bullet point here seems very cryptic. What the heck is he talking about? What does he mean by haircuts? Well, some of you listening will know exactly what I mean when I use this expression, even though you've never heard it before. Here's the expression. Actually, I'll frame it in the form of a question. Are you a haircut noticer? Now, even as I say that, I bet you there's a lot of people that are listening right now that know exactly what I mean. I am talking about not necessarily haircuts, but certainly including them. Do you notice little things in people? Do you notice all the way from birthdays of people all the way to other artifacts? Do you comment on people's jewelry? Do you ask them about their glasses? Do you notice a photo on their desk or on their desktop screensaver that is from a cottage and ask them about it? Do you see a photograph on their phone as they answer the phone during your coaching session that has 2 children on it? Do you inquire about who that is, how old they are, what school they go to, what their big skills are? Do you inquire about those things? That's what we call an artifact. Artifact is some of these seemingly peripheral things about people that range all the way from haircuts to eye color to jewelry to shoes and fashion to photographs, all these kinds of things that are little subtleties in people. Care and concern for well-being and its extent and the extent to which it actually enhances rapport comes from our ability to note and take note of the details of another person. All you got to do is, if you're the kind of person who doesn't notice a haircut and someone in your life really wants you to notice it and you don't, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. It's at work too. Work is not an impersonal place. You know, I'm reminded of a story that somebody told me at one of my clients. It happens to be a pharmaceutical company. Long story short, a gentleman told me that he'd been working with the same supervisor or boss for 16 years. And this particular week, his son was trying out for a very important hockey team. And as you well know, in Ontario, hockey is a big deal. And your kids' hockey, if you're a parent, is important to you. And this particular individual was very effusive. He spent a lot of time walking around the office telling everybody how excited he was for his child to try out for this hockey team. He told everybody all about it. So excited, the kids try out for hockey, such a big deal. Everyone knew, including his boss, so much so that he had to ask for the Friday off to go and drive his kid to Burlington for this tryout. It's a true story. He made it very clear to everyone who works with him how important this hockey tryout was to him and his family. And especially to his boss of 16 years. So, a Monday morning when they had their 7:30 a.m. meeting, which they have every day, everyone that he works with was coming up to him and saying, "So, how did the hockey tryout go? How did it go? How did it go?" All except for one person, his boss. His boss came into the room and essentially pounded the gavel on the table and said, "Let's get down to our meeting." Not once did he ask his employee of 16 years, how did the hockey tryout go? Despite the fact that that employee made it very clear that it was very important to him and that commenting and noticing and asking and inquiring was an important part of anyone showing care and concern for him. But his boss did not ask about it in that meeting, nor did he ever ask about it. Here's a rhetorical question. Do you think that impacts those people's relationship with each other and level of rapport? Of course it does. So in the context of coaching, we need to spend some time borrowing from, quite frankly, salespeople. Salespeople throughout, certainly in the past 25 years, all the salespeople that I know, they do things like, today it's so easy too with technology. You meet somebody that you're selling to, you take a note on the back of their business card. Here's how many kids they have. Here's where they went to school. Here's an engineer he studied there. Keep track of some of these little things about your coaches so that you can follow up on them. You know, if your coachee mentions to you, even in passing, "Sorry, I'm late. I'm just putting together an anniversary party for my parents." You know what? When you see them again 5 weeks from now, ask about that party. Ask to see pictures. Show an interest and concern. That brings people closer together, and that is the kind of stuff, again, that makes apology, forgiveness, and reconciliation more relevant and more prevalent. It's so easy to do it, too. Just take some notes. Today we've got these V cards. So easy. Pull up your V card of someone that you're coaching and fill in some of those details. One of the things I mentioned before, a real great icebreaker, is telling each other's career story. What a great opportunity to take some notes so you can follow up on some of those things. Even if it's drawing connections and networks. It's another way to do it. You know, it's very interesting. The more specificity, the more likely that care and concern is to be seen the way you want to. I'm reminded of something I was taught as an educator in the university. If I'm giving back a paper to two or three of my students, let's say they all got an A+, and I hand one back and I say nothing. I hand back a second one and I say nothing. But on the third one I hand it back. Remember, they all get the same mark. And the third one I hand it back and I say, "Thanks for telling me the story about your boss. It was really interesting when you worked for that company." Well, you tell me. Whose A+ matters more? The more specificity, The richer the relationship, the better the rapport. The easier it is to solve problems. And a big part of this is about thoughtfulness. Even at the minimum, remembering things like birthdays, remembering things like where they work, remembering things like where they went to school, remembering things like what they studied, remembering things like why they are deciding to engage in getting their CPA designation. These are important things to show thoughtfulness and such that you follow up on those things when you see them again. Care and concern for the well-being of others. By the way, this idea around genuineness factors in here too, because people do tell me, well, Stephen, I've got to show care and concern for the well-being of some of them. Maybe I don't really care about. Then care about them. Why? Because the outcomes of you as a coach getting the best out of this experience depend upon it. That's why. That is your goal or objective. That is your what do I want, is to create an effective coaching outcome. So when you want it, when you're focused on your goal, you do what you have to do to achieve that goal, even if it might in some way feel phony. Make it real. Make it genuine. One of the most important elements of developing a relationship with people, especially if that relationship is going to be ongoing, especially if that relationship is going to touch upon important and intimate elements of someone's life, like their job and their career and their abilities to move forward in a field, is the development of norms. Norms are really a fancy way for talking about expectations. And they are generally agreed upon informal rules that guide the way members of a group or a dyad or a department or a coaching relationship interact with each other. There's two types of norms, generally. Tacit norms and overt norms. A tacit norm is the kind of thing we want to, in many cases, avoid. Because a tacit norm is a norm that develops because it happens, not because you've planned it. I'll give you an example. If you've decided that you're going to meet your coachee at noon on Friday, and you show up at 7 minutes after 12, it's no big deal. But you don't talk about it. You arrive at the coffee shop, at the office, wherever it is that you're meeting your coachee, and they're sitting and waiting for you for 7 minutes. No big deal. Then what happens? Second time, you show up 7 minutes late, 10 minutes late as well. Third time. Think your coachee is going to show up 7 minutes early? No. What happens is that coachee is going to come at 10 minutes after the hour too. You know why? Because your behavior has created what they call a tacit norm. A rule that we've never talked about, but it seems to happen. Maybe you've encountered this at your workplace where meetings get called from 9:30 and they'll start till 10. And eventually you stop showing up at 9:30, right? That's a tacit norm at work, at play, really happening. We don't want those things to happen in a coaching relationship. We want to make sure the norms are developed on purpose, because that's the way we want it to be. So the norming process in a coaching relationship begins with being able to say, you know what, let's think about some of the things that might become tacit and make them overt. Like, say out loud and clearly, by the way, hi, now that we've told each other stories, let's talk about some norms for how we work together. I will always be on time, and I suggest that you do too. If you're not going to be on time, I'm going to ask that you please do me the respectful thing and give me a shout at least 12 hours before that you're not going to be here. And then you agree to the same thing. That's a classic example of an overt norm, because norms work because they manage the expectations that human beings have of each other. In any relationship, it's certainly important in the context of a coaching relationship. We want to be thinking about what's the purpose of the coaching together. That's a really important norm to talk about. What kind of expectations do you want your coachee to have of you? So, for example, making it clear that you will perhaps give advice to that coachee, and that your expectation is that they'll try out the suggestions that you make. Really classic norm for coaching. There's no point for a lot of coaches to say, hey, I'm going to come and I'm going to tell you my opinion and you can choose whether or not you're going to try it. That might impact your ability to coach that individual. Coaching norms also aid to help anticipate issues. Real proactivity. So things like, hey, listen, we might disagree sometimes when we're working together in this coaching relationship. How are we going to deal with that? What are we going to do when we disagree with each other? How are we going to fight? How are we going to have conflict? How are we going to get over it? What are we going to agree about the reactions when we disagree? anticipating some of the issues and thinking about how you might want to overcome them. Really being proactive, not reactive. Norms help to advance the rapport in the relationship. They help to advance it because they manage the expectations that people have of each other. They soften people up. They make it so that everyone's shoulders go down, everyone becomes a lot less defensive, a lot less focused on impression management and uncertainty about other people. If you think about it, every relationship in our lives is the process of developing norms over time. You know, you see this at work and in personal lives. You ever notice that at work you might have the same problem with your boss every time you have an argument? You might notice that in your personal relationships, that you and your partner have the same conflict all the time. Well, you know what? The way I put it is this. You got to start with the issue, you got to develop a norm and create a solution. Sometimes my wife and I have to fight about whose job it is to empty the dishwasher in order to create a schedule for whose job it is to empty the dishwasher. And that schedule is a norm. So it's a normal process. So what are some of the things that we might talk about when developing norms? We might talk some of the topics that are particularly useful for coaching are things like scheduling. How frequently are we going to schedule our appointments? What mediums are we going to use? What's your preferred method of communication? Telephone, email, for setting appointments? How are we going to deal with lateness? What are we going to do around our expectations for lateness? How are we going to agree to deal with that so we don't have uncertainty around the reactions? What medium are we going to use for coaching? Let's talk about that at the front end. Is that person willing to meet the first 1 or 2 sessions in person so that you can make it a more effective coaching process? What's going to make more sense for people? Is there a location that's convenient for both parties? What are the logistics around scheduling, confirming, meeting, talking? How are we going to deal with disagreement and conflict? What are the learning expectations of coaching? You don't want your coachee to be disappointed in your coaching, but the only way people become disappointed is if they don't know what the expectations are. Set them. Collaborate with your coachee to determine what are the objectives of this coaching endeavor. What really do you want to walk away with? Perhaps one of the things you want your coachee to use is a journal, something I've talked about a few times in this program. Some book that they can bring along with them to make the best of the coaching process. If that's an important part of your coaching process, you got to tell them that from the beginning. Bring a book. Buy yourself a book. Please bring it to coaching every time. Maybe you have other expectations. Please don't interrupt me. I'm going to give you advice. I'm going to ask you to use it. What are the expectations you have? And also, who are you? Big part of norms. This is who I am. Sometimes I'm quiet. Sometimes I'm distracted. It's a normal thing for people to be who they are. And the best way we have of managing it is when you let people know who you are. And that story about your career and who you are can be really helpful in that area. Same with soliciting that same information from your coachee. Of course, we can't do any of this stuff without self-awareness, an important part of your relationship development. Are we aware of... Now, self-awareness, it's funny, I talk to my students about this all the time. They say, yeah, I'm self-aware. I'm amazing, fantastic, super innovative, and rocking in every possible way that that can be conceived of. The real excitement of self-awareness is really not just about your skills and competencies. It's also more so about the harder stuff. What are your shortcomings? What are your challenges? What are the things that cause you challenges and problems in the way you deal with people? Really important to let people know that. I had a client of mine a number of years ago, and it was really helpful. They said, listen, I'm happy to meet in a coffee shop to do coaching, but I got to let you know I'm a shiny ball person. In other words, I get distracted. So if a handsome man, a pretty woman, an interesting looking piece of food, something happening outside, any of these things happen, it's very tough for me to stay focused. I'm going to turn my head. Shiny ball. Now, I could, as a coach, say, that's wrong, you shouldn't be that way, and that's terrible, and that's not going to do anything. I need to understand this so that when I see them distracted, I can A, bring them back. B, not judge and be mad at them for doing it. And C, I know that's who they are. One of the most important parts of relationships, and we know this from other contexts, is accepting elements of who people are and seeing what they're capable of and accepting that for what they're capable of and not constantly wishing people will be different. As I like to say, the only people that believe that others can change and that they will Newlyweds. So self-awareness is about that. It's also about being willing to be open and tell people this is who I am. It took a lot of guts for this individual to tell me, listen, I'm easily distracted. That took a lot of guts. Confidence, real confidence. Getting back to the topic of humility and confidence. To be transparent. A big part of self-awareness is also to get feedback from others, but that's not just about being receptive to feedback from others. As a coach, in many cases, your coachee is not going to give you unsolicited feedback about your coaching ability. You have to seek it out. That's an important part of your self-awareness as a coach and as a manager. Are you actively seeking feedback? There's a tool that I like. It's so simple, and you can use it as a coach, and that is at the end of each session, or even better, at the end of each topic, to ask your coachee, is what I've been talking about making sense to you? It's a line that I like to use all the time. It doesn't mean do I agree. It means am I explaining myself well? Or even at the end of the coaching session, I always ask my coaching clients, has this been of value to you? And making it easy for them to say no by saying, hey, look, if it isn't, you let me know. Because if it isn't, I'm going to find a way to make sure it is valuable for you. Because that's my goal. My goal is to make sure my coaching is valuable for you, so I need to know if I'm doing that in the right way. You got to seek feedback to get it. Don't rely on other people always to give you feedback, especially when there's already somewhat of a power differential between you and your coachee. And again, humility. If you can't see your faux pas, if you can't see your warts and all, as they say, you cannot become self-aware. Because you will not be receptive to the feedback of other people. You won't request it, you won't solicit it. A related idea is the idea of social awareness, also fundamental to your ability to be an effective coach. You know, social awareness is a really interesting idea. I'm reminded of a scenario that I often encounter in my work at the university, where I spend a lot of my time as a professor and faculty member. And sometimes even after teaching the concept of social and self-awareness, I encounter these things. I will tell the students, we're taking a break right now in the class for 10 minutes because I need to go use the little boys' room and have to make a phone call. My break is really important to me. And I'll always tell my students this. Yet fascinatingly, many of them rush up to the desk at the front of the class right during that break. And I can give them all the social cues I want. I can turn my back to them. I can begin to walk out of the room. But some of them just will not pick up that social cue, such that they'll even follow me out of the classroom. And I've had them follow me into the bathroom to continue a discussion. It was a clear indication of a complete inability to read social cues. This is an important part of your ability to coach. Can you tell when someone's disinterested? Can you tell when they're distracted? Can you tell when they're embarrassed? Can you tell when something's too sensitive for them to talk about? Can you read the cues of other people? Can you read the social cues? Can you tell whether or not you're talking too much? Can you tell whether or not they want to say something? They're chomping at the bit to jump into the conversation. Can you pick that up from them? This is difficult for a lot of people. Again, one of the things I mentioned earlier is we're very focused on what we want to say. And social awareness brings us the ability to focus also on what we want people to hear. By being aware of what people are hearing, by being aware of what people are paying attention to. To do this, to really be socially aware, one of the things we need to do is learn about the needs of others before we tell them the needs of ourselves. It's an important part of, remember, social awareness is not self-awareness. We talked about that already. Social awareness means learning about the needs of others. What do you need from me? You know, in a coaching context, one of the most important things to find out in the interest of social awareness is to find out how the other person, how your coachee learns best. People learn in different ways. Some people learn by talking about a specific example or story and applying a concept to it. Some learn sort of hypothetically by you looking at the examples that you provide as a coach. Some learn by experience, by observation. There's all different ways that people learn. We might want to find out ahead of time, how does your coachee learn? What's the best way to learn from them? What is their approach to being helped? And gain some social awareness so that we can read those cues a little better. I've learned that one of the most important and exciting elements of social awareness, and I have to admit, I've learned this from a student of mine. He taught me this wonderful mantra. You got to make it easy for other people to do what is difficult for them to do. That's a big part of social awareness. If I want my coachee to change an element of their behavior, and to do that, they have to admit that they're doing it wrong right now. I have to make it easier for them to admit that they're wrong. I can't make it harder. I have to make it easier, because they can't learn unless they're able to see the ways in which their actions aren't producing the outcomes that they desire. If they're not willing to admit that, I can never teach them anything. I can never coach them on anything. But I can't make it harder for them. I can't demonize them, judge them, because that's going to make it harder for them to admit that they've done something wrong. You've got to make it easier for people to do what's difficult. And to do that, you really got to be able to read the social cues of other people. So, pretty interesting stuff. We're going to be talking in our final module, upcoming, a little bit about some process challenges. So what are some of the challenges we might encounter in the way we the coaching unfolds? What are some of the challenges we might encounter in a very human way about the judgment and evaluation of other people? How can our propensity to be judgmental impact our ability to be effective as a coach? How does blame, fault, and personal responsibility manifest itself in the coaching context and in coaching relationships? And again, how can we further this frame of a focus on a goal rather than a problem, in our interests to be proactive as a coach rather than reactive? I'm really looking forward to moving to this final module, and I'll look forward to our next session. Thank you for listening.